All right, welcome to our episode 2 of Coffee and Corona with PJ and Caroline. See this beautiful background that Caroline is sitting in her tree of life. What's the name of that painting?
Mm, Thanks for putting me on the spot, PJ. It's called Colors of Spring,
Ah, that's beautiful.
I think.
I think it's actually called My Desert, but
No, I don't think this one is my desert. We can talk about it later.
yeah, but we could, yeah, we'll figure it out. So this episode of Coffee and Corona is provided by Hope Springs Studio. If you go to hopespringsstudio.com, you can see more of these beautiful paintings. And it's hosted by Piece of Shirt. And I'm wearing one of mine today because I love this little alien piece on Earth.
I love that too. So
Me too.
adorable. And so is the person wearing it.
Oh, there's the feels already. So let's see. On today's episode, we're talking about being polite. We did the happiness hangout yesterday of being polite, and I could not believe it was just buzzing. People were just buzzing with thoughts about politeness. And I'm curious. I'm going to put you on the spot again. Why do you think people had so much to say about politeness?
Well, hold on one moment, because I think we haven't necessarily defined who's coffee and who's Corona yet.
Oh
So
well,
it looks like you're coffee. So I guess I'm going to have to bust open this
yes.
this Pacifico, and so just a moment. I don't mean to be impolite. Let me just.
Oh, that's fine. I liked your Guinness that you had earlier. Like,
Oh yes, well thank you. Well, the reason I wanted to get this one out is because I wanted to see if I could offer you some, because I don't feel like I should, have a beverage without sharing it. And this is such a large beer, and we're talking about, politeness.
Well,
That
I have a little bowl. You want to pour it in the
so let's see if we can. Okay, here.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
You're welcome. If one of these days we'll be sitting in the same room doing these podcasts, and I will extend the same level of politeness for you.
I will look forward to that. And to all of our listeners, I think you're looking forward to hanging out with your friends and family and loved ones.
Yeah.
Even going to work is probably going to be nice.
Just like actually going to work.
Yeah, just to be around people again.
Yeah. But back to your question, I think politeness is a hot topic for a few reasons. One is that I think you pointed it out a few, yesterday and also earlier, with how when the coronavirus and COVID-19, when it first started, there was this rallying to like how do we support each other, and we're all in this together. And now that we're a couple months into it, I think we're all feeling sort of that the niceness has kind of worn away, because we're feeling worn down. And I think that is I think it's, so we're craving positive human interaction, and so much of that begins with being polite, because being polite, in my opinion, is an arm of being kind. That it's, that so much when somebody says please and thank you, and it's heartfelt, or offers something just out of kindness, pours the coffee for you first, or just like these small human, they're very human touches that I think it's sort of, we're all craving it right now. What do you think?
What do I think? I think all sorts of things. Well, the thing that comes to mind first for me is when we started the happiness hangouts, it was in person. And most of the conversations, every meeting, we ended up talking about social media and how people misuse social media. It's this amazing technology for connecting with each other from across the world, and yet we're popping onto our social networks and we're just yelling at each other and spouting our opinions and calling each other names and bullying each other, and we're blocking anyone that we don't like. You know, we get on there and it's all this negativity. And so, like you're saying, with when Corona started, it was this huge outpouring of kindness, people reaching out to each other, communicating, using technology to actually connect in positive ways instead of all the negativity. And so kind of also what you were saying is that now it's kind of shifted. The novelty of being shut in and doing Zoom meetings and stuff has worn off. And what I see is people going back to their old habits of negativity and working out their negative stuff on each other instead of digging in, staying patient, being even more patient, just so that we can maintain that respect. Because to go along with what you said, I think being polite is this show of respect to other human beings. I'm saying thank you because you deserve to be respected as a human being. And you know, somebody raised a really great question, and actually I'm going to share the talking points with those who are following this podcast by video. You can go ahead and see those, hopefully. And one of the things that I see in people like working their negativity out on each other, which is too bad because we're trying to go back to our old ways. And I think this whole shutdown has been this enormous wake-up call of, hey, what you've been doing has not been working. You've been talking about fixing the planet, but you're still doing all the things that break it. And so the shutdown to me was like this huge opportunity to shift what we're doing and the way we do it. And like all the kindness that I saw was like that enormous first step of we're treating each other with respect now.
Right.
And now I'm just a little bit worried because now I see all this frustration building and taking it out on each other. I would really love to see if we can shift it back to where it was the positive thing. I think the politeness is this enormously powerful tool that we have available to us to be kind, like you were saying, and to treat each other with some respect, even if it's in very basic ways.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. The respect is key. You remember how, well, I don't know if you remember, but maybe in my household, it was always respect your elders and always be polite to your to your elders. And I remember at the time, you know, part of me when I was a kid was like, well, that makes sense, I guess. And part of me was like, why? You know, why is it that, you know, because they're the elders, they should get respect? And so I think, and all of the kindness and politeness. And I think now that as I ever approach elder category, I think I see the wisdom in that. I don't know exactly. I don't know exactly where I'm going with that, except to say that here's an analogy. Here's maybe a better analogy, or not an analogy, but an equation, I guess, is that something like what people say about climate change, that if we do everything associated with climate change, you know, we reduce our resilience on fossil fuels, we use less water, we do all of these, we drive less, you know, and let's say people are actually wrong about climate change. It's like, oh well, we still have we've got clean air, clean water, a nicer planet, you know, is that really so bad? And I think the same thing is true with being polite, that you know, even if it didn't have some sort of, you know, because I actually believe being polite has a magical quality to it, that if you know, people are much more likely to approach a person who who has a smile and a just a sense that they're welcoming, and being polite is very much about being a welcoming kind of individual, that that even if that magic isn't there, is it so bad that people are, you know, making each other feel better by by saying please and thank you and here, let me get the door, sure, car, go, you know, you can you I'll let you out of the of the Circle K parking lot because I'm, you know, the next car in line, or you know, whatever it is. I know that I'm always super thankful for those people that do that. And it's, you know, because those are, like you said, those are the little gestures that make our lives better.
Yeah, that makes me think of, you know, a lot of times a lot of people say things about returning to old-fashioned values, and you know, opening the door for people, saying please and thank you. Those can seem like old-fashioned values, but again, what it comes down to is treating people with respect. And I think the world needs, you know, again, one of the comments that we make when we're talking about social media is how people are on social media trying to be validated. You know, people are doing wild, crazy, stupid, whatever things to get attention. And sometimes even if it's negative attention, and a lot of times, you know, you hear about parents who they have kids who are acting out just because they need attention, even if it's negative attention. And um, you know, I think the thing about what you're saying to me is that it's really nice to validate people in positive ways and not make them work for it. I think it's really nice to be validated as a human being without having to make somebody, you know, I don't have to convince you that I deserve respect. Why should I have to convince somebody that I deserve respect as a human being? You know,
Hmm.
I think that that's kind of lacking in our society, is that, you know, I have to convince you to pay attention to me. I have to convince you to validate me, whether it's good or bad. Um, it's like everybody's constantly marketing or selling themselves for some little tidbit of attention. But I think if somebody holds the door open for you, and here comes the store clerk comment, because if you're going through the checkout stand and you validate that person with some politeness, you know, it really, I think you're right, it does have a magical quality because it validates them as, hey, you know what, I'm not just this automaton beeping your food through so that you can get out of here. I'm a human being,
Hmm.
and I deserve to be treated with some kindness and with some respect. Politeness is a great way to do it. And I'm going to turn the mic over to you because uh, one of the questions that came up during the Happiness Hangout was the aspect of sincerity. You know, you can be polite without being sincere, and I'm curious about your thoughts on that. You know, should we be polite even if we're not sincere about it?
Um, yes, I think you can be. And yeah, that is an interesting thread of politeness. And, you know, like as your note says, that even supervillains are are polite. To say, I mean, who knows, maybe they're sincere. But no, I think that I thought that was an interesting aspect of the conversation yesterday, which is that somebody who is overly polite and um, doesn't seem genuine can actually feel patronizing, and and yes, insincere, or like they want something, or they're just putting up with you, and they have to be, and they have to be polite because of their job. But it's sort of a, you know, it's like a gritting of the teeth as opposed to a sincere smile. And I think maybe because my glass is always at least half full, that that is the exception and not the norm.
Yeah.
I was at a dinner a few weeks ago, and I was having dinner with a few people, and some of them I didn't know, and one person I knew pretty well. And she was raised in a Southern household, and the topic of conversation was getting really awkward. And she she essentially kind of sort of shut down that thread of conversation and was like, well, now how are you? And I thought it was great because, and it felt, I mean, it sort of felt insincere, but it was this polite Southern segue of, I'm going to move this into a different direction. So it can be used in a, in a variety of ways.
Yeah. As you say that, I kind of think of the alternative, and it's like, well, if you consider the alternative, and people could be just blatantly rude, and I've gotten quite a bit of that in the last week and a half, where people have just come back really snippy and rude, and I think, I just have the tendency to shut those people off, and again, I think of the negative ways that we interact with people on social media, and that's what a lot of people do is they shut each other off. It's kind of like people were isolating themselves virtually, and now that we have this actual isolation going on, we're understanding the need to be connected with each other. And so I think i would I, I would love to see people reaching out and connecting in positive ways and turning that into a habit, rather than what I'm seeing of people kind of going back to the old habits and trying to do things the old way. It's like, how do we maintain the positivity? And again, I just go back to politeness. And even if people are doing their Southern, let's shift this,
Uh-huh.
politely. We could use an alternative way of doing it that wasn't very polite, and maybe we wouldn't like
Mhm.
that so much.
Have
But
you ever have you ever gone to a restaurant and you were either not cool enough, maybe not dressed exactly the way the other patrons were, or for whatever reason you just didn't feel at home, either because of who you were, or who you were with, or something, and were ignored or treated rudely by the by the wait staff?
yep, I've had both, actually, both where they treated me very much like I didn't belong there, and they kind of hoped I would leave because I was making them uncomfortable.
Hmm.
But I had others who they actually were very kind to me and just treated me like a normal human being, even though I stuck out like a sore thumb. I obviously didn't fit in. Actually, one of those was the last time you and I hung out in person, um, at the restaurant. I thought nobody would be there, so I did not dress nicely at all. I was practically in my pajamas, and the wait staff there were actually very kind. I thought they were being kind of mocking me, but they were actually genuinely just being nice,
Hmm.
polite, and it was nice to be treated nice. So, have you had a similar situations?
Yeah, I was thinking back. I have a couple of different stories. One story was, I remember, so I grew up in northern Utah, as most people know, and it is it has one particular dominant religion. And when you get into the very rural parts of, like northern western Utah, the and people know, everybody in these really small communities knows who other people are. And so I remember one time we were out camping with my family, and we're not members of that religion. And we were out camping, and so I'm sure we looked pretty scruffy, and we went into a little breakfast place over on the Utah Nevada border, and sat down, and they never even waited on us.
Whoa!
They never. We sat there for about 10 minutes, and there wasn't even hardly. It's not that it wasn't busy. There was maybe another table of, people, and those people were looking at us like, oh, they don't belong in here. And yeah, we sat there for about 10 minutes, and then decided to leave. And that experience, I think I was maybe 10 at the time. And I remember asking my mom and dad, what that was about. And I think they both said, well, that's an example of not being very polite. And I just
Is
kind
that
of
to
left
be
it at
polite?
that. And we went down the street and we found someplace, much more welcoming. But yeah, that's sort of always kind of, stuck with me. And I think about, my friend Melanie has, she's, I guess the Peace Corps has a platinum rule. So the golden rule, treat others as you want to be treated. The platinum rule is treat others as they want to be treated. And I think that is an excellent perspective on politeness, that understanding, what you want and how you want to be treated. Once I know that, I can better, I can better help you and make you feel comfortable.
Yeah. And I think there's like your story kind of reminds me of one of the big points that came up in the hangout yesterday was that being polite and being a doormat are not the same thing. And a lot of people can kind of take advantage of your politeness and treat you like a doormat. And so there's kind of some difficulty, like, you're sitting in that restaurant. Well, do we assert ourselves and say, hey, you know what? We deserve to be treated with as much respect as everyone else here. And we shouldn't, again, have to convince you that we deserve respect.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, we don't actually have to get into the topic because it's a tough topic, but I do want to point out to people or share with people that being polite is not the same as being a doormat. It really still is okay to assert yourself, but being assertive and being aggressive are not the same thing. That's another topic of its own. But I think that you can still assert yourself and maintain politeness. You don't have to reflect people's rudeness or disrespect back at them, because one of the important things about politeness and the magic, I really love that you use that word, part of the magic of politeness is that if you use that as an anchor, you can actually maintain your integrity through difficult situations. If people are being rude, disrespectful, or mean to you, you don't have to sink to their level. You don't have to dip into the same negativity as them. You could actually use politeness as an anchor to keep your integrity as a human being. And on the other side of that uncomfortable situation, you can still look at back with no regrets. It may have been uncomfortable or maybe awful or whatever, painful even, but you kept your integrity, and that's a huge part of maintaining happiness in life, is being able to look back at every moment, at every day, at every year, whatever, and say, I really kept my integrity. I did my best. And it's, politeness has a magic quality. You're right.
Yeah. No, and I think you make a good point about not being a doormat. And I would argue that politeness, although it can be used to sort of help move things forward, politeness is not supposed to be a tool to get what you want. Polite politeness, I mean, like I said, sometimes, like let's say you're on the phone to, Verizon. This is not sponsored by Verizon, by the way. You're on the phone to a company and there's been a problem with your bill and you need to sort this out, and you have the emotionless person on the other side who has no control over your account. It's not going to help in any way to yell at that person. It's probably, it's going to be much better for everybody, for me, if I'm that person, to keep my cool. If I'm not getting what I need from them, to politely say, hey, can I talk to a person who's, higher up, or your manager or whatever. And I don't have to be a jackass about it. Even if I'm frustrated, I can still be polite even though I'm frustrated, because polite is not about getting what I want. Polite is about showing people respect. You're absolutely right about that.
Well, I'm going to have to challenge that thought just
Okay.
a little bit, because I agree with you uh, for the most part. But I also think that as far as manipulation tools do go, politeness is probably the better way to go, because you could use anger. the way you're saying, to manipulate a situation. You could play a victim to manipulate a situation. You could throw a tantrum to manipulate a situation, or you could be polite to manipulate a situation. I mean, the supervillains are polite because they know that what were we trying to figure that out? Is you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar?
Yes, and it turns out it's bees because nobody really wants.
So we didn't really figure it out. And so I think as far as manipulation tools go, maybe politeness is a better way, because a lot of times we are trying to get what we want. We go through a life probably most of the time trying to get what we want using one tool or another.
Mm-hmm.
And some people go through life using hammer as their only tool, and they hammer their way through life. And I don't think that's too awesome for anyone around them. But maybe we could use some honey instead.
Yeah, like
And
I do. I have another restaurant story associated with that, but I don't mean to interrupt. Are you interrupting?
no, well, I was just going to say, my other thought is like, it kind of depends on what you're trying to get to manipulate. You know, are you like the supervillain who's trying to get, world domination? Because politeness, if world domination is what you're going for, but if you're just trying to get, your phone bill sorted out, sure.
Right, that extra fee removed.
That's not that, that's,
yeah.
It's okay to use politeness to get what you want if
Mm-hmm.
your end game is a good one. So yeah, what's your restaurant story?
So many years ago, this is another Utah story. I was in college at this time, and there was this friend of mine who he was a waiter at this really cute restaurant. I don't know if it's still there. My friends in Utah, if you're listening, let me know if the Xanadu Lodge is still there. But so he was a waiter at the Xanadu Lodge, and his girlfriend was also a waiter there, and so or a server or whatever they're called. So these folks came in and they sat down, and they looked rough and scruffy and dirty, probably like my family did. And when we went into the coffee shop over, on the Utah-Nevada border, but they came in and they sat down, and my friend's girlfriend turned to him and said, "Oh, I don't want to take them. They look, Jews judgy." And he's like, "You know what? I'll take care of them." And so he waited on them. He was pleasant. He made sure that they had absolutely everything they needed. He treated them like any other customer in there. And at the end of the evening, the guy who turned out he was scruffy, but he wasn't poor, and he pulled out a wad of bills and gave my friend like a $100 tip or something crazy.
Wow.
And so he was pleased as punch about that. But then his girlfriend wanted to like have half of it because she gave him the table.
No way.
No way. No way.
No.
And so I think, I don't know, do you think there's a relationship between trying not to judge people and being polite?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it also ties to your previous comment before, because they all tie together with emotional awareness, emotional maturity of, either keep your judgments to yourself or withhold judgment for a while. And it takes a mature person to be able to withhold judgment and just let's see. Let's not jump to conclusions. Let's not judge based on really shallow things like appearances. And you're talking about person on the phone being angry to try and get what they want. And it's like those are judging people, making snap judgments, making knee-jerk reactions, using anger or negativity to try and get what you want. Those are all they're emotionally immature behaviors. And so when you're able to withhold judgment, deal with your own difficult emotions on your own instead of taking them out on others, I mean, that speaks to a level of maturity. And I think even if you aren't that mature, you can practice politeness anyway and have that give you a better outcome in most situations, so that as you're trying to figure it out, figure out your own stuff, grow emotionally and mature, in these different ways, if you use politeness anyway, both you and whoever it is that you're interacting with are going to be better off in the end, I think. Does that answer your question? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, I think so. And one of the things that kind of popped up in my mind while you were talking is about manners, that I think a lot of times people equate politeness with manners. And do you remember when we were talking about this particular podcast like a week ago, about how we were like, oh, we should have the, like a fancy teacup and the top hat, and sort of like this concept that having good manners equates with being elite. And I'd like to know your thoughts on are good manners, how do I phrase this? Is good manners the same thing as being polite?
I think so. I mean, I can't think of a difference between the two. I was raised with very good manners. Our mom, she wanted to rise above where she felt like she came from, which was a lower status socially. So she was, politeness, good manners were extremely important to her. She would coach us how to talk on the phone, how to answer the phone, how to introduce people at the door, how to treat strangers, say at church or at school or whatever. We were very well-mannered kids. We were very polite, and we're still polite. And that's partly why I think it's important, because I held on to that value. I don't know. Do you have a reason for asking why they're the same? I mean, do you think they're the same?
I think they're the same to a certain degree, but I also think people get judged. People get judged by their manners, and it doesn't have anything to do with their politeness. So if you are, I don't know, sort of if you don't set a table the correct way, in my mind, that's not, and maybe that's not even manners. That's probably more etiquette. I think I'm probably conflating etiquette with manners. So.
And I can see the crossover on that, because we were also taught a lot of etiquette. We had to set the table in certain ways because we, had a big family, and we do the Sunday after church Sunday feast. And so it had to be the proper setting and everything just right. And I think that there's a lot of crossover between etiquette and manners and politeness. And I can see people being judged for their manners or politeness, both positively or negatively judged for their manners. Some people might see a polite person and be like, oh, there's a sucker, I'm going to go take advantage of them. Or some people might see manners and say, oh, they're very, well-to-do or whatever, and I should treat them with more respect than they deserve. Because you can't really tell what's underneath the surface until you actually get to know someone or interact with them on a deeper level. But again, I keep circling back around to, I think it's a matter of treating people with respect, and if we're using politeness to do that. And I think it's actually good for us in the end, because if somebody can look at us and say, that person was polite, and this kind of circles back to what you were saying at the beginning of the conversation, people really take their cues from you. And so if you set the tone with politeness, if you hold on to politeness regardless of how they're behaving, people will really start to take their cue from you. And you really can use it kind of like a magic wand to say, would I like this situation to go better than the alternatives? Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay, let's use some politeness. Let's use some common courtesy, which is not that common these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's almost like quiet leadership.
I like that.
It is, yeah, that I think that's a really good point. How about this? So this is like kind of a little bit of a non sequitur. I'm going to throw a few things out at you, and you're going to tell me if it's polite or impolite. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Eating while you're talking to somebody on the phone.
I would say is most of the time impolite. A lot of these are probably going to depend on context, so I'll just say most of the time impolite.
Um, Having to abruptly leave a meeting.
Most of the time impolite.
Even though, let's say that what about walking out in the middle of a conference when you're late for something?
How big is the conference? Are you sitting in the back where you don't have to bother? Because like if you are like in a huge conference where you leave and it's really not going to matter, and you sit in the back so you don't bother anyone really, or as few people as possible, I think you're using a lot of courtesy and politeness in whatever in that situation. But if it's like a huge conference and you sit at the very front and you have to like walk through the whole aisle and walk over a bunch of people and you walk out so that people's attention are on you instead of the speaker, totally impolite. But like for instance, we have the Zoom meetings and people need to leave early.
Mhm.
I think you set the expectation at the beginning of, hey, we're going to leave, just want to let you know, so that it's not like you're wondering what the heck or you feel like we've interrupted. Like you set the expectation. I think that's polite. If you have to leave, I think there are ways to handle some of these situations you're asking about.
What about someone talking during the movie?
Oh, so impolite. That's
I know that bugs the crap out of me.
yeah. People on their phones in movie, so like that just pisses me off so bad. If you're at a classical concert or ballet or whatever, and people have their cellophane candy, so
But
impolite.
but yet popcorn, when you hear people eating popcorn in a movie, that's just kind of, you accept that.
Most of the time. There are some annoying chewers, I will admit.
So I think the common thread with those scenarios is you're thinking about the other person.
You mean being thoughtful of the others, or?
Yes, that I know. Yeah, that chewing in someone's ear while you're on the phone with them, exposing someone to your cell phone or your conversation in the movie, getting up and disrupting a bunch of people in a conference. Yeah, it's kind of a disregard of the people that you're interacting with.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And sometimes I think those people are doing what they're doing in order to get attention, that negative kind of attention. I mean, when you were saying that, I kept thinking about this movie I went to, and this young woman behind me kept on kicking, like really hard, kicking the back of my seat. And it was her and a bunch of her friends at college age sitting on the row behind me, taking up pretty much the whole row, and her just continually kicking and kicking my chair to the point, I was doing the whole trying not to say anything, but give her a nasty look in the dark. She can't even see my face because it's dark, right? And it got to the point where I had to stand up and lean over my chair and tell her to knock it the F off, or we were going to have a problem. And she was trying to get attention, and so I think people can be rude and impolite because they're seeking attention. And I think, again, politeness becomes this kind of positive refuge for us to, I could have been mean to her. I think for the most part, I kept my cool. But I also needed to stand up for myself. So it was like, again, not being a doormat, politeness and being a doormat, not the same thing. I don't know. I'm going
Yeah.
on.
Well, here's an example. I think that, that's an example of being polite and not being a doormat. And just like, your story, I was thinking, while you were talking about that, I was thinking of the toddler in the airplane that's kicking the back of your seat while you're sitting there. And the polite, is it polite to turn around and tell the parent to have their kid stop kicking your seat?
Yep. I absolutely I think it's a necessary politeness, in fact, because if that kid doesn't stop kicking, uh, which they shouldn't be in the first place, and the parent should be monitoring their kids and saying, hey, don't kick, that's not polite. And if they don't take that responsibility and it falls to you, then I really think it's a necessary politeness. Otherwise, that frustration and anxiety of having this confrontation, this potential confrontation, starts
Mm-hmm.
to build. That's where the negativity starts to come up. And and so I would actually say politeness can help in a confrontational type setting, because if you have to do something like that and you've got that negativity that's like, you're right,
Mm-hmm.
do that first before the negativity or the frustration builds, because then it's going to be so hard not to take your negativity out on those other people that it might not be possible. It might become a very negative situation, confrontation.
Yeah.
So yeah, I like your question. I mean, what do you think?
No, I agree with you because I think you make a really good point about the that politeness is it has a diffusing quality that to turn around and talk to the parent like, hey, that he keeps kicking my seat, or and they'll be like, oh yeah, sorry, and if they because as a parent, and when your kids are little, they do so many things. It's hard to track them all or know what to correct and what not to correct. And so having a gentle reminder from somebody else that's not like, Jesus, get that kid to stop kicking the seat, as opposed to, hey, he's kicking my seat.
Well, that gets back to the emotional awareness, emotional maturity, because if somebody flips out like that, they've got anger issues about something else, or maybe lots of other things.
Yeah, well, they've been sitting there having the seat kicked and until they can't stand it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I had to stand up and turn around. And no one likes to be put into that confrontational situation. And if you're not being, conscious and aware and polite on purpose, and somebody has to take that action, I guess you would hope that they would be polite, or respectful in that situation. So I don't know. I think you're right. Diffusing, it's a very diffusing, and it's got that magical quality.
Mm-hmm.
Love that you use that word, because politeness has more power than I think most people give it credit.
I do too. Yeah, and I think this conversation and the happiness hangout yesterday really helped me think about that in some different ways. So yeah, thanks for this.
Yeah. Well, do you have any other thoughts or questions about politeness? I mean, we really could go on for a long time. The
Ad
conversation
nauseam.
yesterday did.
Impolitely, we could take this into a completely so long that it might be impolite.
Impolite. Maybe we'll have to talk about it again another time.
No, I think I'm good.
Awesome. Well, I think we've had a good conversation. I hope the people listening have had a good listen and had interesting thoughts. We're going to have ways for you to engage with us pretty soon. We're going to have a website where you can join in on the conversation. Maybe we'll think of some ways, and if you can share with us different thoughts that you have of how you'd like to engage with us, that would be great too. Because we're developing what we're doing here. We're not sure what we're about, other than spreading the positivity, sharing some positive, thoughtful things to, get you thinking about things that maybe you wouldn't have normally thought about. So again, we're sponsored by Hope Spring Studios. Go to hopespringstudio.com and pieceofshirt.com. My alien is melting. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us, and we hope we get to see you or hear from you again soon.
Yes, thanks so much. Take care.
I can't figure out how not to
How to get us to stop recording.
stop recording. I'm gonna have to practice that.
I know, because we're recording right now.
I know. So